This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
As Padmavajra said, it's 18 years since I delivered a series of talks on a Going for Refuge retreat. I gave a number of series of talks in the early days of the launching of our Padmaloka ordination process. I gave the last of those in, I think Sadaloka was remembering 1990 something or other. So I'm very glad indeed to be invited back and to be speaking to you lot, most of whom I've never met before, although I've probably seen you on this occasion or that occasion. There are very few of you that I recognise. And that's quite something for me, because I did play quite a large part in launching this process. I did my part, I played my part, I did my bit to get it underway, along with Padmavajra, Surata, Sona, Suvajra, Chittapala, Aloka. We worked together. I probably missed somebody out. Have I missed anybody? No, I think that was the team in those early days. Pramudita was around not long after that. But we worked together very harmoniously with great inspiration to establish the process that you are all now participating in. For me, having been there when it was launched, to come back now and to see it continuing, and to see you, many of whom I've never met before, benefiting from that process is a great inspiration, a great pleasure, a great delight, and a sort of confirmation of the work that we did, because something has come of it that continues and that you are participating in, and that will no doubt be passed on, will be handed on, and others will benefit from it in the future. Indeed, my association with Padmaloka goes back much further. I was able to visit it before we actually purchased it. I came to see Bhante at his cottage in Castlelake, some 20 miles away, I think, because it was said that we were going to buy this, we were thinking of buying it. So I came and had a look round. I was here not long after Bhante moved in, it was purchased. I came on a seminar that Bhante conducted in the room that is now Surata's room. Still had the same tartan patterned carpet, which you can sometimes see beneath the detritus of Surata's life, the flotsam and jetsam of Surata's life. Surata's consciousness spread out unevenly across the floor. I used to come and sit in that room with this tartan patterned carpet, which Buddhadasa bought for Bhante, and listen to Bhante pouring out the Dhamma, taking some text, some basic text of Buddhism, and exploring it in ways that I wasn't even aware were completely fresh and new. For me, that was the Dhamma, the way Bhante put it. It's only when I began to look more widely I realised just how radical, how revolutionary, how unusual, even today, the way in which Bhante pursued the Dhamma was. He used to sit in a circle, 10, 12 people, just spellbound by Bhante pouring out the Dhamma. And so much of it unexplored today. I strongly recommend that you go back and look at those seminars. And even though some of it is rather quaint, it's a bit like reading about something from the Middle Ages or something like that, mainly because of the way we were, you'll find still gems of Dhamma that have not been taken up and brought to life. They were extraordinary times, those. Very, very creative times. Bhante, so active, so engaged Dhammically. The whole movement growing around him. It was very small still in those days. I think probably 40, 50 order members by that time. We could all sit together, all the men could sit together in the front room at Padmaloka here, the one with the big fire. We could all sit round and report in, everybody reporting in. The whole order, men's wing of the order there present, women's wing was probably only 10 order members at that time. And Bhante was kind of inventing a presentation of the Dhamma that was relevant to us, and that is the foundation for this movement that we are all part of. And what's so gratifying to someone like me, who's been involved from so early on and had done my part, played my part in building it all up, is to see it so alive now. Padmaloka has blossomed and continued to blossom ever since it was bought. It's grown more and more vital, more and more spiritually alive, more and more creative, and more and more tangible atmosphere of spiritual upliftment has attached to the walls, soaked into the walls, which I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have felt just the moment you came. You feel something in the atmosphere, in the mood of things that is independent almost of the people concerned, something that's very much alive and that you can begin to participate in. And not just participate in the sense of passively absorbing, but participate in the sense of contributing to. A great stream of spiritual energy that has been generated here, or at least has come to flow here, that you yourselves participate in and can contribute to in the future. Something quite remarkable, quite special, indefinable, but nonetheless probably to most people quite tangible. You know what I'm talking about, even if it's hard to exactly put your finger on what it is. You may be connected more with the people or with the decor even, although tastes differ. You may connect it with the way things are done, with the way things are arranged, the way that you're greeted, the way that you're made to feel welcome. Maybe you'll attach it to particularities, but what it is something more than those particularities. It comes initially, at least in this context, from Bhante. It's what Bhante was bringing to life in those seminars. A very strong sense of a vision that while Bhante was speaking, you could actively see, you could witness. Tremendous excitement. I remember sometimes while Bhante was speaking just being unable to contain my laughter, because I could see something so brilliant, so beautiful, and so engaging, so full of energy, I could hardly contain myself. Fortunately, I didn't contain myself, which is why I'm here today. I'm sure that to a greater or lesser extent you've all experienced that, maybe just in the way things are done, maybe in what you've heard expounded by the likes of Padmavajra, who's very much in that Sangharakshita tradition of brilliant Dhamma exposition with real life, real energy and deep intelligence and a certain mysterious madness to come from the sublime to the ridiculous, knocks your socks off. Yeah, you can sense that, you can participate in that, you can contribute to it. That is what this whole thing is about. It's about sensing, participating in, contributing to a spirit, an atmosphere, a force that is absolutely experienceable. It's something that you can definitely taste, but that is indefinable and that transcends anyone as an individual, at the same time as being experienced by individuals and emerging from individuals. That's what this whole enterprise is about. We are here to generate and to experience, to participate in and to enliven, to bring to greater and greater fruition that sort of spirit, that atmosphere that we especially experience at a place like Pabnoloka. Not only at Pabnoloka. I'm very closely connected with the LBC. There's I witness a few faces who I'm familiar with from the LBC. But somewhere like the LBC, you can definitely at times experience it, that same sort of spirit, that same atmosphere that comes from the individuals, but that's more than the individuals, connected with them, generated by them, sustained by them, but more than them. That's what this whole business is about. That's what your request to join the order is about. It's about putting your shoulder to that wheel, to helping it to spin to your own benefit and the benefit of all who it can touch. That's why you're here. Well, whether you know it or not, that's why you're here. You're here to help that for your own benefit, because it enables you to go beyond your horrible little narrow self. Not you uniquely horrible. We're all horrible too. That dreadful sort of self-absorption and self-preoccupation and self-reference, everything coming back to I, which, can be momentarily pleasurable, and when you're ahead of the game and winning, it can be intensely satisfying, but you can't ever sustain it indefinitely. So we're here for our own benefit to participate in something that goes beyond that narrow self-preoccupation, that narrow egoism. And we're here to help that to live in the world, linking up with others who are experiencing it, generating it, especially linking up with other Buddhists who are doing so, because in Buddhism we have a unique insight into what it is that hinders that force, that trans-egoic force, and what benefits it, what helps it. We have a way of understanding the way life is that enables that force to come into play, like no other religion. Other religions, I think, are about this, but in Buddhism we have a unique, clear conception of what it is that stands in the way of that trans-egoic force, and a way of thinking about it, talking about it, and thereby practicing for it, that, at least in my own relatively limited understanding, is unique. That's what you're here for. And of course, for many of us, we want that not just for ourselves, but because we are strongly affected by the suffering in the world, by the mess that the world is in, and the not merely the poverty and the injustice and the violence that so many people suffer from. As Padmavajra hinted, I spent 6 months of my year in India working amongst people who've come from a background of extreme social oppression and who found their way out of that social oppression through the Buddha Dhamma. And you don't have to go very far in India to see the extent of suffering around, in the immediate sense of material deprivation. Something like 60%, 80% of Indians are deprived of safe drinking water. They don't have access to a reliable source of drinking water. That's a very material problem. But it actually would be relatively easy for India to sort that out. It's not sorted out because of attitudes of oppression, of selfishness, which stand in the way of the simple measures being taken to deal with it. For instance, a friend of mine is a social worker working for the state government in Madhya Pradesh. Her job is to bring central government funds to tribal people who lack safe drinking water. Large amounts of money come from the central government to help poor people living in the jungle who don't have access to safe water. Of the money that's provided, 10% actually goes to the purpose for which it's given, because it's filtered out all the way down. The water isn't filtered, but the money is, by caste interests, by peculation, by government corruption, all the way through the system. So that's just a tiny example of the widespread suffering there is in this world today. We, in a country like Britain, in countries in Europe, we don't see so much of that. Although, in Slovakia, I've seen poverty amongst gypsies that is as bad as anything I've seen in India. And it's because of the mentality of people in positions of power. So, the world is full of suffering of that kind. It's full of suffering just because people live such misguided, empty, distorted lives. That's what we more see in a country like Britain. People wasting their lives because there's no real sense of value. Get me off this topic quickly. So many of us are motivated also by that, by our own suffering, by our sense of the huge suffering in the world. And we want to bring this force that transcends individual, sectional, private interest for our own sake, because that sectional, private, individualised, individualistic interest is not a source of satisfaction in the long run. And because it's that individualised, private, sectional interest that prevents the problems in the world being sorted out, that actually, if we all put our minds to it, would be relatively easy to solve. Whether it's safe drinking water, whether it's hunger, or whether it's just decent education. So, yes, it's that force, that spirit that we can feel at Padmaloka, that our order is about. We're about, if you like, channeling that. Our order is nothing but about that. That's what we live the Dhamma life for. We practice the Dhamma life for. So I hope that you all have a sense of that you've got a sense of that spirit, and that you're here because you want to bring it more fully into your own life and into the life of the world. I hope that's why you're here. I'm sure it is in one way or another, whether clearly or not. And that's our purpose. And I'm a living witness to the way in which that does actually happen. I was here right at the beginning, and I've seen Padmaloka grow in its ability to manifest that sort of spirit. It's not always perfect by any means. Yeah, he's confirming it, not always perfect. And at times you'll experience things that are less than ideal. But still, more than ever before, at somewhere like Padmaloka, the LBC, other places that I've not visited necessarily, not everywhere, not all the time, not in equal measure, not to the same degree, sometimes gone off the rails, sometimes distorted, perverted. Nonetheless, you'll find present within this Triratna Buddhist community that this spirit is alive. And it's become more and more alive as time's gone by. To begin with, it's just Bhante and a bunch of callow young post-hippies. Just post-hippie. Well, okay, not even post-hippie. We had the hair to prove it in those days. And Tibetophiles. Padmavajra even had the shirt to go with it. And out of that, Bhante gradually created a spirit. It's interesting, he said that he himself doesn't consider he was the best person to do that. And he actually means that. He's not a particularly exciting person in a sort of immediate sense. He's not charismatic or in an immediate sense. He's not even particularly prepossessing as a physical being. He's certainly no, young bodhisattva radiating light. These days he manifests as an elderly English gentleman. In my day he appeared as a sort of, what could one say, I suppose, a rather superannuated hippie, or maybe leftover bohemian. Long hair and... Anyway, we won't go further. But out of that rather particular personality, well, I always say, if you want to understand Bhante, you've got to start by remembering he came from Mars. Now, please don't take me literally. That could start a whole new movement. But very odd background, very odd sort of antecedents and so forth. But from that particular background, he managed to connect with a generation, and gradually, out of us, out of all our perversity, individualism, etc., to gradually tease out this spirit, this spirit that transcends us as individuals to a greater or lesser extent. And it's grown. It's become more and more manifest, more and more, what can I say, pure. Still not purely pure, of course, never will be. It gets mixed up, it gets distorted, gets perverted, but it's much more reliable, much more mature, perhaps, in its manifestation. And you are the beneficiaries of that. My poor generation, we had to just struggle. But you've got it easy now. But before I get the violins out, well, that means you can expect that if enough people really dedicate themselves to it in the right sort of way, that spirit will get stronger and get deeper, get more powerful, get more flexible, get more multivalent, able to reach more and more people, enter more and more people into it, encompass a very much wider range of types of cultures. I'm conscious that even here we've got quite a range of cultures represented, from Mexico to India. Actually, it's a very short step. But yes, as time goes on, it'll get richer, fuller, more powerfully expressed. Eventually, I'm hoping that we'll see something emerge that is very much like Buddhism was in the early medieval period in India. It can never be quite like that because we live in a secularized, multicultural situation. But you get glimpses in India today of what Buddhism must have been like 500, 600, 700, 800 years after the Buddha. I've been going to India for many years, since 1985 indeed, and spending 6 months there for much of that time. But I've always been too busy really to do Buddhist tourism. This time, for various reasons, my duties took me to places where I could do easily a bit of Buddhist tourism. I went to Ajanta, and I really very strongly recommend that anybody going to India makes a beeline for Ajanta. You probably know these are rock-cut caves which began being created very early on in a second or third, first or second century before the Common Era, and went on being created in, I think it's the 6th century of the Common Era. 2 great phases of creation. They're in a fairly remote valley, a river valley, it's horseshoe-shaped, and there are, I think, 28, 29 caves cut into the hillside from a number of different stages. And at one time it was an important monastic university, it's thought, with at least, 300 or 400 permanent monks permanently there, studying and teaching the Dhamma. Dignaga is a very important figure in Indian Buddhism, and indeed in Indian philosophy, is the founder, really, of the most important figure in Indian epistemology, Buddhist epistemology. But he taught there. But what you see when you go there is caves of astonishing beauty. They are remarkable architectural feats because they're cut into the bare rock and quite highly finished architectural forms, pillars and sculptures, bas-reliefs, high reliefs. But what you especially get, which you get nowhere else in India in such a form, is very early frescoes. There's a famous fresco of Padmapani and one of Vajrapani. But there's one cave in particular just covered in frescoes. I've seen the paintings over and over again. There's so much reproduced. But when you see them live, it creates a very strong impression. The impression it produced on me was rather like the first time I went to the Arena Chapel in Padua. I don't know whether any of you know it. It's an important place in the Renaissance. Some people think the sort of place where the Renaissance really emerged, where Giotto just covered the walls of a largish chapel in frescoes. And they're really beautiful and recognisably naturalistic, although still showing their roots in almost Byzantine sort of forms, but very, very much alive. So you could see these people that he was painting based on life. You see the same at Ajanta. You can look at a fresco and you can see into a whole world. They're very badly damaged. They're not lit properly because, of course, the light would make them decay. But you get flashes and you can take your torch in and you can sort of see a kind of window, or not even a window, a chink, almost a keyhole into a world, a culture. And it's a Buddhist culture. So at Ajanta you get a sort of glimpse of 6th century India. At least in that period, at that time, in that area, Buddhism was the dominant influence. It wasn't the only one, but the court itself was dominated by Buddhism. The kings were major donors. They created they gave the money to create these caves. So you get a strong sense of what a rich, what a beautiful, and what a highly articulated culture came out of Buddhism. And this process had been going on again and again, really since the Emperor Ashoka. Ashoka, 200 to 300 years after the Buddha, as the emperor of the whole of northern India, northern and much of central India, even much of Pakistan, Afghanistan. He became a Buddhist and he promoted Buddhism as well as other religions, interestingly enough. He promoted Dhamma, but he especially promoted Buddhism. And you get glimpses in what remains of Ashokan era Buddhism of a culture of astonishing beauty and depth. At Bodh Gaya you see remains of that kind, other places. Even our Bhaja retreat centre has near it caves that were created not long after Ashoka, where you can get a glimpse of a way of life, not just for the monks, but for lay people too, that was permeated by the Buddha Dhamma, where this spirit, this living spirit, was felt throughout society. That's what you glimpse. And it's my belief, it's certainly my fervent hope, that our work here will create more and more of a rich and diverse culture, which will never be coextensive with society as a whole. That's no longer possible, I think. And perhaps good thing too, because that when it becomes coextensive with society as a whole, begins to fossilise because it becomes subject to sectional power interest. But I hope that Buddhist culture, with its art, its music, its verse, its architectural forms, will increasingly ramify throughout our modern world. I hope it does that, not because I'm a Buddhist triumphalist, whether I am or not is another question, but because it then provides people with an easy access to that spirit, which makes it far more easy for them to engage fully and deeply with a Dhamma life. Engagement is the principal difficulty of Dhamma life. Don't we all know it? It's very easy to be inspired. It's very easy to have the vision. Very easy to have a really good conceptual grasp, at least with certain limits. But to actually motivate yourself and to get yourself to live a full Dhamma life is really where the business is. It's a constant struggle to make your life so that everything you do manifests your Buddhist commitment, your Buddhist motivation. That's my experience today after so many years, after such long teeth and such lack of hair. It's still difficult to keep really engaged and to feel that everything you do connects with your highest aspirations and that your most basic urges somehow connect with those most high aspirations. That's the struggle of the Dhamma life. And when you have a highly articulated culture, it becomes much, much easier. Every step you take is, so to speak, a reminder of the Buddhist path. Buddhist symbols, Buddhist images are all around you. Buddhist language is in your language. You know the way in which today, one of the most depressing experiences I know is a shopping mall. Because it's the temple of consumerism. The high temple, the cathedral of consumerism. And the land is full of them. And shopping malls, they're coming up in India now. There's a chain in India called the Big Bazaar. And it's a big bazaar. It's just a big shopping mall. Shopping malls are the major development in India. For people living in poverty, the mall is spreading everywhere. And you go into those places, I don't know whether you find this, you go in and I won't answer for you, each chacun a son goût, you get this appalling sense of oppression. Even though everything you want and more is there. There's an appalling sense of deprivation, of cramping of the human spirit. And as if you can't breathe. Claustrophobia. I don't suffer from claustrophobia in the ordinary sense, but a sort of spiritual or Dhammic claustrophobia begins to overtake one as you move into these places. And you see no signs of upliftment. And what I always do is I always look for the Buddha figure. Because there will be one somewhere, because the Buddha figure is now an advertising cliche. You'll find one somewhere, but then your sense of relief is dashed by the sense of its degradation. And our world is like that now. Of course, there's much that is also uplifting. Culture is still alive. High culture is still alive. Beauty is still there. There are many people who strive for something better. Many who want better for others. But the overall mood or atmosphere is this dreadful, really well done consumerism. And it means your sort of Buddhist life is always against the stream, the current of the culture. So somewhere like Padmaloka, it offers you a little glimpse of a Buddhist way of life. The people who live here, I'm sure they have their bad moments. I won't ask what they do with their computers all the time. I have no personal knowledge of this, but I just know what every guy in the world does when they've got a computer at times. Let's be frank about it. Anyway, big at football. It can't get much worse than that. But, by and large, they live in a world where everything's connected with the Dhamma. It's not hard to connect with the Dhamma. When you're cleaning things, you're cleaning with things for people so that they can come on on retreat and get a hit of the Dhamma, as it were. So what I hope is that we can, between us, move this on so that a stream of Dhamma comes more and more to life in the world and creates increasingly a culture which people can easily connect with and which can easily uplift them. Now, I know you're not all going to be living at Pamaloka, although please do if you can. You're not all going to be living in communities or working in team-based right lives. Probably very few of you are these days. That's the way it is. More's the pity, but, well, that's the way it is, and there are opportunities from that too. But you've got to try to create of your situation, whatever it is, a real culture of the Dhamma. You've got to transform your family, your marriage, if you've got a marriage, or your partnership, if you've got a partnership, your life as a parent, your working situation. You're going to have to make of that an environment, a culture, even if it's only in your own mind, that enables you to practice the Dhamma, so that you can live out the Dhamma life. It's extraordinarily important. I think the greatest danger that modern Buddhism faces is its assimilation to Western individualism. I've been travelling with my dear friend Maitreya Nagarjuna, who's a son of Dr. Ambedkar, who was the man who really transformed the lives of millions of people who came from, the so-called untouchable community, and many others too, and gave them a vision, a sense of a higher life. And he did it on the basis of the Dhamma. So I've been travelling with Maitreya, and he's a very shrewd observer, a highly intelligent man, and he's watching us all. And he's giving me a little running commentary on our individualism. I'm going to have to ask him to stop. It's too embarrassing. But he looks with a wry eye on the way in which we make our choices as if nobody else existed. As if even our Buddhist life was a sort of personal acquisition. Even our idea of, insight, whatever, it's my insight. And this is, I think, a major current in modern Western Buddhism. It's a very strong theme in Buddhism in this country. Of course, there are major exceptions to that. I'm not damning all of Buddhism outside Triratna. But it's a major current in modern Buddhism. It's very strong in America. Britain is never far behind, and in fact, where individualism is concerned, we have our own particular, rather cool brand of it. But it's a strong trend, a strong tendency. I've often referred to Nietzsche's fears about Western culture expressed in The Birth of Tragedy and a number of other places. He feared that Western society was moving towards what he called a passive nihilism, or even sometimes something more like, he said, a Western Buddhism. What he meant by a Western Buddhism was not what we mean by Buddhism. He meant the assimilation of non-theistic, ethical, even spiritual ideas to our increasingly disconnected, isolated notions of who we are. And he feared that Western culture would eventuate, because of the death of God and the loss thereby of all the cultural underpinnings of our society, that it would eventuate in a sort of highly individualised world in which ethics is merely to do with personal comfort and not disturbing each other, and being nice to each other until the lights go out. And he called that Western Buddhism. Unfortunately, much of Western Buddhism is a Nietzschean Western Buddhism. And it's to avoid that, it's with that very much in mind, very conscious of it, that Sangharakshita started the Triratna Buddhist order and community. vividly aware of this danger right from the start. I remember so many discussions with him, so much coming out in talks. For instance, a very important talk that I think should be really obligatory reading for everybody is Enlightenment's Experience and Non-Experience. It's a really important talk to locate us outside the modern rush towards an individualistic Enlightenment experience, which is nihilistic in origin, personalistic. So our movement has been created to try to locate our individual efforts in a larger communal effort, so that we don't fall back merely upon self. If we fall back on self, we miss the whole enterprise. We fail in what it is that we've committed ourselves to. So our efforts are about connecting with this force, this energy, this atmosphere, this spirit that goes beyond us, that we experience as ours, that doesn't deny us and our own will, but that transcends it. And where you feel that you are willingly participating in something that goes beyond your will. And even in my own limited experience, spiritual experience, that's very much been something I've appreciated and benefited from in helping to create this ordination process, in helping to establish Padmaloka. I've been able to serve something that's more than me, and to serve, in a way, you. Generations yet unborn at that time, if you see what I mean. Not with a great feeling of what a wonderful man I am, but just feeling, well, I've benefited, others can benefit. And that gives the deepest sense of satisfaction and promotes, taken in the right way, in the right spirit, in the right context, a real personal growth. A real personal growth, which is a growth in going beyond personal. So I wanted to locate everything I'm going to say in these next days in that context. I want us to keep remembering that we're not talking just about me. And we're not just talking about me because that's good for me, if you see what I mean. What we're talking about is something that I can give myself up to and participate in, with great difficulty and many a wrong move and much misunderstanding. But I can participate in and thereby find personal fulfillment and enable others to find a fulfillment for themselves. And that perhaps in 100, perhaps 200, perhaps 300 years' time, if we're all alive, no, not if we're alive, if the world is alive, if human beings are still alive, will enable many, many people to very easily, very naturally, just dive into the Dhamma. Of course, there's a very strong element of personal will involved. In order to bring that about, we need to make an effort. We need to make a lot of effort. We need to activate the karmic kind of conditionality. We grow in the first place principally through karma. Karma, I hope I don't have to spell out what karma is. I hope I can just use shorthand. Karma is that aspect of the total assemblage, collection of conditioned processes. It is those conditioned processes that emerge from our self-identification, from our sense of ourselves as centres of agency and experience, our sense that I give a talk, I listen, our sense that I will do, our sense that I have done, our sense, I've talked to you about me 25 years ago when I was at Padmaloka. Of course, actually, the me that probably sat on this very spot and gave talks or meditated or whatever, was really in many ways a very different one to the one that's here now. But I can identify myself with it. So karma is the acts of body, speech and mind that emerge from that self-identification. And karma states, the law of karma states the relationship between the actions of body, speech and mind that emerge from that self-identification and the way in which those actions modify the world, but more significantly, modify me. This is the basic principle on which we practice the Dhamma. When you are practicing Maitri, what do we call it? Maitri Bhavana, you are activating the principle of karma. Because you don't feel metta when you sit down to do it, but you deliberately exercise volitions. May I be well, may I be happy. You call up things to mind and so forth, and you do all the tricks that you've been taught. And sure enough, probably later in the afternoon, maybe as time goes by, actually in the session, suddenly a wave of goodwill emerges in your mind, in your heart. Because of that effort, a sort of first sort of experience of metta is generated. And from that you generate more metta. So you gradually, through karma, you generate a stream of transforming mental states. Actually, a stream of transforming you. Because you will metta, you experience metta, and the next round of willing is much easier, much deeper, much fuller, much richer, and so on. That's the basic principle of Dhamma life. We need a very strong conviction in this. There's nothing else at work, at least in the first stages, just this. It's not really a question of techniques or methods, anything of that kind. They may help. The main thing is your effort to develop skillful mental states. And they will gradually modify you. You will emerge in a better way, in a richer, fuller, more subtle, more refined way. That's the principle that we're activating. So we're using the force of karma. That's the wind that we're trying to use to move ourselves forward. But eventually, those winds of karma bring us to a point where self emerges in a more and more subtle, plastic, elusive way, a less and less hard, grainy, final, fixed way. And we're able, with the right effort, to let it go. To let it go. And then a completely new force takes over. And that force is Dharma. Those processes, those conditioned processes, coming under the heading of the Dharma Niyama. And those processes are spontaneous. They don't happen because of your willing. They just happen because you've let go of self. You've let go of clinging to self. And that is exactly what we've been talking about. That's that force that's at least to some extent moving at times at somewhere like Padmaloka. Something that's more than I. And that's more and more manifesting amongst us. So we're going to be talking about how we make an effort to activate karmic forces and dharmic forces. I'll spell out more fully what I mean by that, but of course I'm going to be talking about the system of practice, of dharma practice that Bhante has given us. And I won't even say what the features of that are today, because you've probably got enough already. But yes, we're going to be particularly looking at those forces of karma and dharma and how we work with them, how we play with them, how we use them to take our lives on to the point at which we escape the wheel. While I was in India this time, I was at our retreat centre in central India, the Shuansung Dhyan Bhavna Kendra, the Shuansung meditation centre outside Nagpur in the jungle with tigers all around. Well, not many of them, but certainly monkeys and deer and leopards and all that. And I was asked to give a talk on the theme of Shuansung, and actually I was asked to give a name to a shop they're opening, which had to be connected with Shuansung. So I did a bit of research, the wonders of the internet, even in the middle of the tiger-strewn jungle, and I found reference to the dream that Shuansung had had, which had made him leave China and go to India. So I suggested that the shop could be called Shuansung's Dream. I really liked this. So I gave a talk about Shuansung's dream. So I'll tell you what that dream was. It's a really lovely dream. But Shuansung woke, or rather found himself in the middle of the night, standing in front of a huge mountain, which reached right up into the sky. And he felt an intense longing to go to the top of the mountain, as one does. I live at the foot of a mountain in Wales, and it's difficult not to keep going up to the top of it. Fortunately, the weather prevents it being Wales. But yeah, he longed to go to the top of the mountain. And so he thought, well, I'll set out. Then he saw a huge sea between him and the mountain. So, being Shuansung of such uncompromising vigour, he just plunged into the ocean and he swam across. Despite all the difficulties, all the sharks and so forth and so on, he crossed the ocean and found himself standing on the narrow ledge that surrounded the mountain. So he gazed up the mountain and thought, now, at last, I can climb the mountain. So he started to climb. He got up just a few feet, then he just slipped down. The mountain was so steep, so glassy, so precipitous, that there was no way up. On a huge hill, truth stands. Anyway, never mind. A quotation from Donne came into my mind. I couldn't get up. So he being Shuansung again, he stood there wailing and weeping, for sheer sort of sorrow, feeling that he was not worthy. That's why he couldn't get up. And as he stood there, longing to be on the top of the mountain, full of misery at his own inadequacy, at this sort of something in him that stood in the way of his getting up. And suddenly, an intense wind blew up behind him and blew him up to the top of the mountain. Well, you can read the moral of that story very easily. Karma gets you across. Karma gets you through the sea of samsara. But it cannot lead you to freedom. Because you've still got that little core of self, that little core of self-attachment that prevents you from climbing the mountain. You can't get up the mountain. You can get across the worst excesses of klesha and of jnaya, of illusion, of wrong view, false understanding. You can get through that. But for something else, for something to carry you to the top, you need to connect with a wind that can blow you to the top. And that wind is the force of dharma, which is not at your will, that requires the suspension of your will to carry you beyond it. So we're going to be learning how you cross that great ocean of samsara, how you move through the kleshas and the jnayas, the false views, the micchadittis, and how you then open up to that wind that will blow you to the top. That wind which Sangharakshita says founded this order, founded this movement through him. He recently wrote to me talking about this, his experience that this movement didn't come from him, but through him, and that it had to be founded. There was nobody else to found it. He wasn't the best person to do it, but it needed founding. He could see it needed founding, so it sort of got founded through him. It's poetic language. Don't get too literal about it. But if we can't speak poetry, we might as well shut up. In fact, better we shut up right now. And, Sangharakshita felt that wind, allowed it to blow through him, and allowed it to begin blowing amongst us here. And he accompanied what he had to say to me with a poem which I'll try to remember. It was a very moving poem. He wrote just 3 or 4 years ago. It's called The Wind. A wind was in my sails. It blew louder and fiercer, hour by hour. I did not know from whence it came. I only knew its power. Sometimes it dashed me on the rocks. Sometimes it spun me round and round. Sometimes I laughed aloud for joy. Sometimes I felt a peace profound. It drove me on, that manic wind. It drove me on, that manic wind. Now I am old. It drives me still. It drove me on, that manic wind, when I was young. It drives me still. Now I am old. It lives in me. Its breath, my breath. Its will, my will. So it's that wind that blows a little bit through Padmaloka that you've asked to participate in helping to blow more strongly. And we'll be discussing how you do that. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.